Hi, I'm Elaine Martell, and welcome to Making the Grade, show where we talk about various educational issues in the city of Marlborough. And tonight we have a special one-hour show with the three new members of the school committee. I'm very pleased to have Rob Seymour, Michelle Bowden-Hettinger, and Mark Hettinger with me this evening. How are you? Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Sure, my pleasure.
Since they had an uncontested election, they probably didn't get as much airtime with debates and some of the other forums that typically candidates get to participate in. So I thought it would be wonderful to have the three candidates share their views on education in this opening series. Now that you've been on the school committee for a whole month, two official meetings under your belts, you're probably pros at this now. But anyway, just for the viewers, just to know who you are, we'll start with Rob. Just a little bit about yourselves for those that may not know you.
Thank you, Elaine, very much, and I appreciate very much the opportunity to come on. I thank M8 and M10 for hosting your show. I think it's very important to give people a perspective of what's going on, and this is very helpful. As Elaine alluded to, my name is Rob Seymour. I've been a lifelong resident here in Marlborough. I have two children, both in the Richer School, and my wife, Christine. We live up in French Hill. I'm currently an employee with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health.
Thank you. Michelle?
Thank you again. Reiterate what Rob said for having us on, and again to M8 and M10 for letting us get to know each other and the public get to know us as well. Michelle Bowden-Hettinger, I've been living in Marlborough for 11 years. I also have two children. I have one at MIES and another at Jarrick. And my husband Lee, we live on Robert Road, kind of near the country club.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And
I know you're also involved with the Marlborough Education Foundation, which I know does a lot of great work raising money for teachers and projects and things that wouldn't normally be funded by the budget. Yep. Great.
true. Thanks.
And Mark?
Hello, Marlborough. I'm Mark Hettinger, and I want to thank Elaine and, again, M8 and 10 for having me here this evening. My wife and I moved to Marlborough in 1992, so I guess we've been here now about 12, 13 years. We have two children, a son and a daughter. Those children are both in the Richer School, one in 3rd grade and one in full-day kindergarten. Thanks again for having us on this evening. I myself am a research consultant in the biotech pharmaceutical industry, and I am really looking forward to tonight's discussion and the next 4 years on the Marlborough School Committee.
Terrific. Now, I know it's really a personal decision to run for elected office, and I know when I ran 4 years ago, it was tough. I mean, I wanted to get involved in the city, but yet I didn't. I was kind of afraid, what would it be like? Rob, 2 years ago, you ran for the city council, this time school committee. Why the change and from going council to school committee this time?
Well, you kind of took my thunder. I think you alluded to yourself. No, it's very much, it's a personal decision. And 2 years ago, I think, based on where the city was and based on the makeup at the time and the candidates that were running for both city council and school committee, I'd elected to run for school committee because that's where I felt like I could best serve the community. This time around, again, it being a personal decision with my wife and my family, and I think the commitment and the amount of time you can provide, that comes first and foremost for me. I've always said my family comes first, and that will never change. The second thing is, while I disagree with some things the city council does, they have a very good, diverse group, and again, we won't always agree, but if we can agree to disagree, I think that's going to really start to bridge the communication between the two.
Terrific. Was there any particular moment or event that made you decide to switch, or was it something you were thinking about during that 2-year period that, now that you have children in the system, a little bit more interested in the school side of things?
I think it was probably last year's budget cycle where, as a taxpayer, I felt like I wanted to see more advocacy come out. And that's not, I'm not trying to cheap shot anyone. I think as a taxpayer, that's what I expected. I think it had a lot to do with that, and it also has to do with having two young children. You very much see, before you have kids in the school system, I think you get very focused to where your kids are at a point in time. Your children get into the school system, and I think you start to grasp again how important it is, and that's, I would take ownership for that, for probably a little bit of narrow-mindedness, but perhaps now I think I found the path, so.
Terrific. And Michelle, this is your first time out running for elected office and a win. Congratulations to all of you. You're probably thrilled that I didn't run. So otherwise it would have been a little more interesting. At what point did you decide to run for the school committee?
I think it was kind of an evolving thing. I've spent a lot of time over the last 10 years or so involved in things revolving around the schools. You had mentioned before the Marlboro Education Foundation, which I got involved with as a founding member when my daughter was just a newborn, because I had heard a lot of negative things about the Marlboro Public Schools, and I wasn't really comfortable listening to kind of the rumor mongering. So I wanted to get involved with people who had kids in the district and valued education. And I think through that experience, and then when my kids started school, I spent a lot of time involved with PTO work. I just kept seeing more and more that there wasn't really a voice from parents and families and students in the process. And I'm a big kind of fan of planning, and I had, as an outsider, had a hard time seeing a lot of planning in advance that was going into some of the decisions that were being made. And then when the budget cycle hit last year, it was so frustrating to watch things, happening and then falling apart, and then, trying to, double back and correct things. And so,
If you think it was fun watching, you should have been part of it.
I can only imagine. And then I think what finally put me over the edge was the knowing that we would need to hire a new superintendent.
Yep. Excellent. And Mark, I know you ran for school committee 2 years ago. Was that a decision that you made 2 years ago to try again this time, or was there kind of a 2-year thinking about it before you took out papers for this election?
After I ran 2 years ago, the support from the community was really unprecedented. I thought it was great. People came to me. I got phone calls. I got a few notes. And that carried over, really, over the past couple of years. For example, at the Labor Day parade, people were always very nice to come up and say things and introduce and, just touch base again. I never really considered not running again. I think the real clincher for me was the announcement that we would be in the search for a new superintendent. And I think that very, very significantly impacts the direction that the schools will be able to take in the next 5 to 10 years. And the commitment and the involvement, as you both alluded to with your kids, it really changes your perspective. And seeing my son, what really got me going the first time was watching how a group of kindergartners were integrated so nicely into the school setting over at Richer in a very short time frame. Being there that first day for drop-off and then coming and seeing how things were a little bit later on really made us believers in the Marlboro Public Schools. And again, a family decision. I talked it over with my wife the first time. Terry was very supportive. She felt I could do it, and it would be a commitment thing to come back and try for a second go at it.
Terrific. One question that I guess I have is there's, I think, a lot of community opinion as to what a role of a school committee member should be. What's your primary role as a school committee member? And as, again, a whole month under your belts now, have you thought about what your primary role is as a school committee member?
Can I ask for a point of clarification?
Sure.
Do you mean from a community's perspective or as a school committee member?
As a school committee member, because I know you go out to some of the forums and, speak out, and I think we've all, gone and taken a look. And I guess the question is some people see school committee members almost as the Price Waterhouse or the auditors of the school committee, as opposed to you really seldom see what about the children and, being advocates for the children. And I'm just wondering personally, what do you feel your roles are, in kind of balancing, the different perspectives out there in terms of what the primary role of a school committee member is. And that's for the three of you, however you'd like to chime
Like
in.
to field it?
I guess I'll jump in alphabetically, and that way I won't wait any of these. I would say probably finance, policy, and staffing. Responsibility, fiscal responsibility with the community's money is foremost. I think what we need to do is generate the best possible education we can for the next generation in Marlboro with the resources we have, and we need to tighten things up and continually look for that incremental improvement that'll take us to the next level. I jump in on policy. The committee was kind enough to vote me as chairman of policy, and I think what we need to do is bring that manual up to date with the current setting we have in the Marlboro Public Schools. And it just happens that the three of us here this evening are the members of that committee. My vice chair, Mr. Seymour, is the quorum. So we'll be getting busy on that in the next couple of weeks. That's certainly my intention as we get everything pulled together here. And I guess the last thing I touched on is staffing, and that's the superintendent all the way down to the point of contact people who are actually, working with the young people every day. Your kids, my kids, the staff's children. Everybody has kids in the school system. That's really a great experience. I just was so taken when my son was in full day K, and within that 6-week period, really pulled that group together. So those are the three things that I really see my role being. They're kind of on a sliding scale. I know the other night we had a discussion about the superintendent or how we would position ourselves to begin that search. That's a staffing issue, and finance is looming on the horizon. And policy is going to be something that we're going to be looking at on a fairly regular basis over the coming year.
Great. Rob, Michelle, anything to add, or go ahead.
I think hiring the superintendent is probably both from a standard procedure, but also I think from where we sit, is probably the most important thing we may end up doing in the next 4 years. And I think you're hiring somebody who is going to be the captain at the helm for the entire district. And I think with continuation around accountability, individual management of funds within the schools, management of policy that goes on, while we serve in some respects a check and balance, and as well in some as advocates and developer of such, the individual we hire it's going to be critical. I mean, and that to me is paramount. Mark touched on finance, and as everybody knows, since kind of things started downward in 2001, finance become very difficult for people, and I think what's happened is you almost have this fiscal Darwinism, where you end up pitting people against one versus the other, and only the strong can survive. And while people will argue that certainly the schools make up half the budget, that's for good reason. It's a huge expenditure, and we're educating our children. And I think, again, this year, the city, even with the potential that additional funds will be coming down from Beacon Hill, both for Chapter 70 as well as other municipal spending, it's probably nowhere near what the city and the schools really need. So I think, again, it's trying to manage through that, and as Mark alluded to, doing the best with the resources we have and being the advocates to get as much as we can for our kids, because that's part of our role, is to be the advocates for both the parents and children in the school, but also for all the residents. We want to make sure that people's money is well accounted for.
Terrific. Michelle, anything to add on your perspective?
Yeah, for me, this superintendent search is huge. And I kind of came into this hoping to bring the perspective of families along with me. And, one of my goals in doing this is to really be reaching out to the community, both the community of students and families, the business community. I think there's a lot more that we could be soliciting from the public in helping to shape the direction that the school district is going in. And I feel like rather than just kind of putting out fires all the time and dealing with money that comes down from the state and trying to figure out how to work with it, that maybe we could be looking at some other things, ways that we could be partnering with the business community a little bit more, and ways that the public can help us dictate. We're going to be doing focus groups around the community to get some feedback from people on where they would like to see the school district go in the long run. And then, working with funding sources and the city council to really back up the goal that we as a community have for our schools.
Terrific. Well, at this point, we need to take a break for a public service announcement, and we'll be right back.
Remember when we brought you the news last century?
Here's what's going on in your city today, Monday, June 17th, 1996. Topping off our news for tonight, the Marlborough City Councilors voted down. And that's just about going to wrap it up for all of us here at News 30. So as always, thanks for watching. Have a great night.
It's a wonderful program for adolescents between the ages of 11 and 15 years old.
News 30 was then. Marlborough This Week is now. Back by popular demand, tune in to WMCT Channel 10, February 10th, as we bring you the latest in local news.
Hi, welcome back to Making the Grade, and this month we have Rob, Michelle, and Mark, our three newest school committee members. And to begin this next segment, I actually listened to your campaign speeches back on M10 a couple of times, looking for themes that you spoke about during the campaign. And the first one that I want to touch on was actually from your campaign speech, Rob, and that was, you had a great quote here of the school committee being the stepchild of the city council, and talking about the relationship between the school committee and the city council, which over the past years has been a little rough at times, to probably is an understatement, but we'll leave it at that. You've only been on the school committee for a month now. Are there anything in the works or plans in terms of better communication or dealings with the city council?
Sure, not to mince words. I think what the quote was more to the effect that the school committee has somewhat accepted the role, or seems to have accepted a role as a stepchild of the city council. And what I was alluding to is the fact that, and a lot of this again came back during last year's budget cycle, where at the public hearing at City Hall, my expectations as a taxpayer would have been that the school committee would have collectively spoken or had at least the majority of folks really down there advocating for the kids and the funding that they were looking for, and to try to convey the message. I think in general what's happened over time is, and this is my perception, other people may feel differently, is that there's a real, there's almost palpable feeling that there's a sense of mistrust and lack of respect between the two bodies. While there are differences of the role, certainly the city council is responsible for citywide affairs, and they in essence set our budget. We're both elected bodies of the city. We've both been selected in some way, shape, or form to provide leadership in the areas that we do. And I'd like to try to bridge the gap and really bring people back together through a sense of common understanding and respect. I think what's important is if people can agree to disagree and to at least engage in the discourse instead of misunderstanding, misinterpretation, and misrepresentation. I think if we can base the argument on fact and understanding, certainly we're not suddenly going to get millions of dollars out of it, but I think going through the process and open lines of communication would certainly give both the city council as well as us, but certainly the people at home, a real feeling that there's an investment collectively here. It shouldn't be pitted as us against them, and I don't think that's what anyone's intent is. But I think it's frankly come to that. I've started talking to some of the city councilors and talked to other elected officials about maybe some ways where we can do that. And I don't think it's something that's going to happen overnight. Anybody who thinks that that sense of distrust is going to happen very quickly, I think is somewhat fooling themselves. The trust has to be earned, and one of the reasons why we've really pushed for zero-based budgeting is to really understand where all the money is going in the school. And I think it helps us be better advocates to go to the city council, as well as be responsible to parents and taxpayers. This is why we need the money. This is what the justification is. We've built from the ground up. We know we need this. The other thing that zero-based budgeting allows you to do is you may find areas where there's a common application, there may be crossover, you may find savings, you may not. But I think what happens is every year is we get X% to build on where we were last year. And there's never really been, at least for some period of time, the knowledge that maybe was last year sufficient for what we needed. I think it's a completely different approach. As a new school committee member, it really gives you a lot of the nuts and bolts of what goes into it. But it's certainly going to help us, as well as our colleagues, I think, be better advocates.
And I think one thing that's going to be a real challenge for you this year is in doing the budgets, you have a lot of unknowns. For example, you have a lot of contracts that are open, both the provision of services such as the buses, the cafeteria, Kelly services with substitute teachers, as well as all the bargaining units. So again, you're kind of going in, doing a budget, and without knowing what the percentages will be in terms of, it's tough to do.
Yeah, no.
So you definitely have a lot of challenges, ahead of you in that, I think I said before, one of the hardest things to do is to make good decisions with lack of information. And that oftentimes, for me, was a reality sitting on the school committee, that you didn't have all the information that you wished you had. But because of the timing of the budget, you had to make decisions, and sometimes we were right, and sometimes we weren't. But we certainly tried our best, and it's a real challenge. But are there any steps in particular, any joint meetings or any kind of joint workshops with the city council to help just have them understand how the school budgets work, or is there anything in the works?
Yes, there is actually. The mayor had informed us as the chairperson of the school committee. She has invited members of leadership within the community, both from the city council and the school side, really around financial issues, as well as administrators from the school department, Tom Abel, the city comptroller, city auditor Barbara Martell, a collection of folks to try to talk broadly about financial issues. It's not a forum for Mr. Delano as the finance chair to go in and start making decisions. I think it's for him to represent our position and talk about issues and start to bridge some of that gap. Again, I don't see this as a 1 or 2 meeting. I see this as a long-term process.
Great. And just now to talk about Michelle's speech, and I know one of the things that you planned was, or emphasized, was planning. The need for better planning, setting goals, putting plans in place to implement them. Again, 2 meetings under your belt, a little early, but I believe you have set goals for this year. Is that correct? I believe you had a workshop meeting.
Yes.
So that has been done.
We're in the process, yeah.
Or in the process, that hasn't been completed yet. Most of the goals, at least from, I know the goals that we've set for the past 4 years, some are pretty high-level goals, 50,000-foot goals, continuing to improve SAT scores, MCAS scores, space issues, gifted and talented. I mean, a lot of those are probably still on the list as priorities as they have been for the last 4 years. What do we do different, or what do you guys do different in terms of achieving those goals? Because I would assume a lot of them also are contingent on funding to reach them, such as full-day kindergarten for all. And again, I could probably go through half the list just off the top of my head.
Right. Part of my interest in the goal setting, the planning process is to, talk amongst ourselves as well as with other people in the community about where do we see the Marlboro Public Schools really going, and what do we as a community want for our schools, 5 years, 10 years down the line. And, that's a process that I think we're starting, and it's going to take some time. I think through this superintendent search, particularly around focus groups like I had mentioned before, we'll be able to elicit some of that information from the public and from other constituent groups around the city. And then once we have that goal, then, as Rob was talking about, looking at the budgeting process, the different departments within the schools are going from ground zero, building budgets that will help us to see what really needs to be provided, and then we can figure out what that is going to cost in the long run. And then looking at that in the context of where we want to go down the line. If we want smaller class sizes, and if that's a goal that people have city-wise, school committee-wise, then space is going to be an issue. And to have the conversation, when you say we might need new school buildings, people get nervous because that's a lot of money. And, we're in the process through NASDAQ coming in, the New England Schools Development, I don't know what the acronym
I can't
stands
help
for,
the
I
acronym
apologize.
It's NASDAQ.
NASDAQ. It's a consulting firm that's come in, and they're in the process of doing a space study for us based on projections in terms of population growth and that sort of thing. And, you know, I feel like as a community, we need to figure out where we want to go, and then we need to put our money where our mouth is. And if we can prioritize what our goals are, we're never going to have all the money to do everything that we want to right away. But if we can set those goals and then, you know, again, prioritize them, so if we have one project to start working on now, then we can, you know, tackle that and take things one step at a time. I'm hoping that the zero-based budget will enlighten everyone to what it really does cost to run the school district. And granted, it's going to be based on the way we've been running it up to now. And there's a lot of amazing things that are going on in the Marlboro Public Schools. And, you know, I would never, you know, suggest that we would need to change a lot of things in terms of the way the services are provided within Marlboro. But, you know, there's been a lot of concern. Again, you know, you read Speak Out and people, you know, comment on, you know, hidden money or money wasted on this, or there's been comments made by various city councilors about, you know, the way money is spent. And I'm hoping that this will help us to really see the way money is spent, see if it makes sense, see if it fits into what our long-term goals are. And if it doesn't make sense, then we need to make some adjustments.
Yeah, I've never did find that Fort Knox at the Deck Center. I've been looking for 4 years,
Yeah.
never did find it.
Yeah, no money trees hidden anywhere.
And you also had another great quote, and because I can totally empathize when you talked about cutting and pasting at the end of the budget cycle last year, and that's definitely how it felt like. You know, it's again hard to make decisions because I'm sure you guys are going to make an estimate on what you think. You know, a lot of these, especially the bargaining units, are going to come in with, and if you're not successful at negotiating to those rates, guess what? You're going to have to probably make some you know, switching at the end to make the numbers work out. And Mark, just to touch on your speech, one thing that you spoke about was strengthen the decision-making abilities and real-time solutions for real-time issues. How do you improve processes? I mean, how do you go about doing that?
What I would go ahead and start with as an expansion on that is getting a lot of background information on everything before the critical moment. What you alluded to, making decisions with limited information. And it's a skill. It's an art, it's a skill, and it's going to take practice. It's going to be a process. I think everybody up to this point has touched on that. And this is drawing information from the community, from people with prior experience, from all the experts that we bring in. I think the NASDAQ group is a good point here, and we need to have an exchange with them rather than a single point, and we can go forward, I know I plan to, and exchange and maybe make some suggestions on things that in that presentation I would be more interested in seeing in a little more detail for that final report. It's information gathering from the administration, the staff, and even the children that come home and share perspectives on what's going on in the classrooms day to day.
I know one of my favorite moments as a school committee member would be you walk into your place 5 minutes before the meeting and there'd be a half-inch of paper on your desk that you hadn't seen yet, that was going to be covered at that meeting. That has gotten much better over time. And I remember it was one of my very first budget sessions. I think it was either my first year or second year. And this was the list of cuts that we got at our places as we were walking in and we were voting that evening. So again, you have some interesting time constraints. And what's also very difficult, I found, was that only meeting twice a month. In order to get things accomplished, you don't always have the luxury of waiting to the next meeting to get more information because obviously, you know, you have to keep things moving. But it's a real challenge. And, you know, I think a lot of the decision making, you know, at least what I remember, some of the I don't want to call it faux pas, but things that I know we rescinded a few votes over the 4 years were basically we got better information after the fact. And, you know, I think to our credit, we were open-minded enough to always reconsider an issue. especially when we got more information. But to me, that was one of the real challenges. And it's a tough thing to do. But anyway, we have to take another break for another public announcement, and we'll be right back. Hi, welcome back to Making the Grade, where we're speaking with Rob, Michelle, and Mark, the new school committee members. And in this segment, we're just going to talk about some of the current topics going on. And I know we had mentioned before, the biggest one right now is the superintendent search. Where are we now with that process? Because I know when I had left this committee, we basically had gotten the responses from the RFP. And where are we now from there? Whoever?
I'll start. Well, we, on Monday night, interviewed the two organizations that had submitted bids through the RFP process.
That was January 30th, right? Because this will be running for a while.
That was January
Thank
30th.
you.
Yep. Sorry. And we have made a decision, and I think it's public knowledge, right? So that we're going to be working with MASC.
Yes.
Yes.
Massachusetts Association for School Committees, that has part of their function is a consulting function. And Glenn Kuchar, who's the executive director, will be working with us
Terrific.
to kind of guide the process and help us set up focus groups and that sort of thing.
I know they've done many searches and, working with them, so great. So that's wonderful. So when will these groups start, or when does the work begin for the search?
I spoke to Ron Guest today, who helped us with the RFP assembly and putting that together. And it's my understanding from Ron that the award has been made, and now papers are being exchanged between the MASC people and the city people here in Marlboro.
Terrific. So when, I imagine one of the next steps will be formulating a search committee with people from the community, parents, people from the schools, school committee. That'll probably be, I would assume, one of the first things that will be done, or is it still early as to what the next steps will be?
No, I think that will be moving forward, as well as getting an organizational meeting with MASC to really lay out all the specific timelines, lay out tasks, and to really get the ball rolling. I don't think we're on a bad timeline, but we're on somewhat of a tight timeline. Superintendent Boniface is leaving in October, and while it seems like a long time, as certainly you know from your own experience, that will go quickly. And I think the scope of the position that you're hiring for, this isn't a position that you would simply post in the Metro West Daily News, get 20 applicants, find the perfect one, and a month later you have an individual. It's a long process, and as you alluded to, you really want to get input from the community, input from current administrators and teachers, perhaps business leaders, and interested parties to really inform the process. And that takes time, but again, we need to move.
And I know I worked with several other school committees when we put the RFP together, and a lot of them went back a second and a third time. So it's not only just finding candidates for the first round. A lot of the local other school committees have been going multiple rounds, which takes a long time. Personal thoughts on what the ideal superintendent will bring. Again, I am a huge fan over the last 4 years of Superintendent Boniface. Extreme knowledge of the system, operations, really great skill set. At least in my opinion, and again, from my background, I'm used to a CEO and a CFO. You never expect your CEO, who's usually the visionary, to be the one watching the accounts. We don't really have that model in Marlboro, in that I don't even think we have a full-time financial person working in the Marlboro Public Schools. I know the assistant superintendent plays that role on a part-time basis, as well as IT and personnel and other things. What's your ideal candidate personally that you'd be looking for? What attributes?
I've given this actually quite a bit of thought. I started formulating this as soon as the announcement was made. And I guess there are 4 things that I've really come to think of as being sort of the foundation of what I call the ideal candidate. And the first of those is staff liaison, someone who can work with the staff and the team that is currently in place. The second of the component that I would have on the foundation is fiscal responsibility. Someone who doesn't necessarily have all the hands-on ability to go, but has a good idea of where things move, how things move, what things are ramping up, and what things are tapering off. The third piece is a curriculum piece. And I think we're very fortunate currently in Marlboro with some strong curriculum coordinators. So this takes a little bit of that burden away from the ideal person. And finally, the last piece in my mind today is something of a public relations individual, someone who can get out and speak the accolades of our school system here in Marlboro to the community, to the business community, and to other districts around the state. So with these four components, and we can expand on those, with focus groups in the community, as well as input from mass consulting, in my mind, that's what we're looking for in the next superintendent for the Marlboro Public Schools.
Any additional attributes, Rob, Michelle, to add to that list, or does that pretty well sum it up for you guys as well?
I think it's a pretty good summation. I think that the thing you really want to think about when hiring a position like this is you're not hiring an individual as an individual, you're hiring them as part of the team, even though they're the leader. And if you look at Assistant Superintendent Jim Joliker, who has been phenomenal, the role he plays around the maintenance and the creation and the ongoing oversight of budgets is huge. So perhaps when you're looking for a superintendent, that may be a less important component because Mr. Joliker is fulfilling the role, and you maybe want to focus more on curriculum. Mr. Joliker has also been focused on other areas, and that's just part of what he does. But I think it's really getting somebody who's a good fit for Marlboro and fits in well with the team that's here.
Michelle, any additional thoughts on the ideal candidate?
Yeah, I mean, I would mirror everything that my colleagues have said up until now. The public relations piece is particularly important to me in, fitting in with the way we, with the process that the school district goes through, and if in fact we're reaching the goals that we want, how do we get that word out? I think the Marlboro Public Schools have so many incredible things going on that nobody knows about, and I think that there would be a lot less concern about the finance. Well, there's always going to be concern about the finances, but I mean, I think people would understand why money is spent the way it's spent and why decisions are made the way they're made if they understood what the end product was and not just looking at test scores, although they've continually been rising. It's not the be-all, end-all to what's going on in our district. So somebody who can work with the community and can articulate the progress that the schools are making, I think is very important. I'm also really interested in looking at the structure of the school department in and of itself. A lot of people in the public probably don't know this, but the Marlboro Public Schools have over 700 employees, and there is no designated human resources professional overseeing the human resources of 700 plus employees. And that function winds up taking up a fair amount of time of the assistant superintendent and superintendent when they could be using their skills and time doing other things. So I'm very interested in looking at the way the hierarchy and the staffing is done currently and seeing if we can make some adjustments so that we can take some of that off of the superintendent. When we're hiring somebody, they can hopefully be able to focus on other things.
No, I agree, because I know just the assistant and the super together have operations, the busing, the teachers, the staffing, the HR, the accounting, plus the overall running of, it's just unbelievable, because there isn't a lot of staffing at the administration. I mean, a lot of people say, there's a lot, but when you think about it, how many 700-person companies do you know that doesn't have a CFO or an HR professional or people in there, just focusing on those roles. So totally agree with that. Another thing that was mentioned at the last meeting, which is the last meeting in January, was you had the preliminary report from NESDEC on school space. And as new committee members, reading that report and with the preliminary recommendation involving potentially a new K-4 school, what was your initial reaction to reading that preliminary report? Any of you would like to take that?
I personally wasn't really surprised, knowing what the space needs are currently, and knowing that a number of years ago, this kind of process had been done. There was a recommendation that there be a 3-tiered program of implementation to address space needs, and that decisions were made not to follow through on all 3 phases. So knowing that ahead of time, it wasn't surprising to me that space, coming up was going to be an issue, and that, that was going to be a recommendation. We have not gotten the final report yet, so I think, it's going to take a little bit before we get the real, meat and potatoes of what the recommendation is going to be in terms of what we need. Personally, I would love to have 4th grade brought back down to an elementary level. I actually would like 5th grade to be. I think K-5 schools really developmentally make the most sense. And if we were able to go back to a model that allowed, the extra support at the elementary level for that age group, I think in the long run, we'd find it, to be a more positive way of doing things. And I am very concerned about the Early Childhood Center and the way that's housed.
And there was I know part of that discussion too, and one thing that we see on some of the forums is, what about Hildreth, what about Bigelow, what about some of these schools that are currently not in the mainstream of the public schools? Any comment on that other than, space and the age of the buildings? Or
Just from the preliminary report, it seems, very clear to me that I know a lot of people are concerned about utilizing those spaces again. Apparently, there have been a lot of laws or statutes or whatever that have changed over time that require a certain amount of acreage per student. Neither of those 2 buildings comply with the law in terms of, I know both of them sit on plots of land that are only a couple of acres. And I'm not really clear that even if that was a decision that we wanted to make, that we could move forward on using those buildings for those purposes, because I don't think they would comply with the law. The other issue also is that the classrooms themselves were built for another era, when children sat at desks in rows, and they didn't get up and move around and do centers and work with computers and do group work. And that's what's going on in 21st century education, and those buildings were not built to provide enough space in each individual classroom to provide for that type of education.
And one thing that I thought was interesting is I knew we had portable classrooms over at, I believe, Kane and Richer, but I didn't realize how many students they house. And as we know, since they aren't as permanent structures as the main buildings, their lifespan isn't as long either, which is just another thing to focus on. Rob, Mark, any thoughts on your reactions to the space preliminary report?
One thing I think it's incumbent upon us to do is that, again, as Michelle alluded to, that's a preliminary report at a certain point in time, and I think it's very important for us as a school committee to go through the report and I think analyze what's there, but also analyze what isn't there, because I think there's not so much a lot of holes. I had a number of questions, which I think we all need to kind of go back and ask for additional information when the final report comes out. For folks at home, taxpayers, parents, really think about the fact, if this is something that is going to continue, which it may well, I don't think we're talking about this for FY07 or FY08. This is a long-term process, and there are really, if we want to get assistance from the state, which certainly we would, you in essence end up getting on a waiting list based on need. They're actually changing the formula for school building assistance, and that will take time. So this isn't something that's going to happen overnight, but getting back to a theme of planning, we need to start planning for it now, because this has been pushed off for a period of time due to a number of reasons, but it can't be pushed off forever. As you alluded to, some of the, my daughter's at Richer, and I've seen some of the modular petitions, and they're not in particularly good shape at all.
Thank you. And we have to take our final break, and we'll be back in a moment.
Remember when we brought you the news last century?
Here's what's going on in your city today, Monday, June 17th, 1996. Topping off our news for tonight, the Marlboro City Councilors voted down. And that's just going to wrap it up for all of us here at News 30. So as always, thanks for watching. Have a great night.
Is a wonderful program for adolescents between the ages of 11 and 15 years old.
News 30 was then. Marlboro this week is now. Back by popular demand, tune in to WMCT Channel 10, February 10th, as we bring you the latest in local news.
Hi, welcome back to Making the Grade, where we're speaking with Rob, Michelle, and Mark, the three new members of the school committee. In this last segment, talking some more current issues going on, and one of the things that was a very hot topic last year were fees. Bus fees, activities fees. What are your thoughts on fees? Personal preferences. Mark, we'll start with you.
As parent of a full-day kindergartner, I'm personally involved with fee paying right now. This year, $2,500 was asked from each parent for sponsoring full-day kindergarten above and beyond what the district was able to provide. At this stage of the game, without the zero-based budget numbers and the dissection that we're going to go through in front of us, it's pretty difficult to give any definitive answer on where we're headed with fees. I don't think we can take them off the table at this point, and we have had them in the past, and we may have to look at those very hard again in the future.
Rob, Michelle, your thoughts? Okay.
My biggest concern with fees the last go-around had more to do with the process than it did with the actual inevitability of fees. You know, I think in tight financial times, you have to make some tough decisions. You either are going to cut programs or cut staff, or you're going to have to bring more money into the district. And I think there's probably, you know, the possibility that fees will come up again this year. It's really too early to tell in terms of the numbers, but certainly parents, if fees are going to be on the table, will know about it with a lot more advance notice. And, you know, I'd like to look into ways to come up with payment plans or that sort of thing, so people aren't stuck with.
That was a great observation, because I know when we voted fees last year, my phone and email was pretty quiet. It wasn't until the letters went out asking for the collection that's when, you know, my email became a Geiger counter with emails coming in. One of the ones that takes a lot of implementation effort, is we found out, are bus fees, because you have to plan the routes. We had talked about, I think they had done the routes as the crow flies, as opposed to the actual driven distances, which could be found with, what was it, Lakeside Ave, you know, swimming across Fort Meadow. So we could have charged the fee for a swim team at the same time. But is any work being done right now on looking at bus fees, and how that would be implemented? Because again, if you decide to do that, you'll be in the same implementation situation that we were in, unless those distances are beginning to calculated now.
At this point, I'm not aware of how much work has been done to date. I think a lot of the work would probably be done by Mr. Joliker again, and I think he's very focused on bringing FY06 budget numbers up to date, and then starting to work on FY07. And I think with that work, concurrently would be around the bus fee. My only pledge around fees, I don't want to say they're inevitable. I think there's certainly a possibility. They should never, ever, they should never be a first resort. We should go through every avenue to make sure that we're doing that last. You know, all other avenues should be expended, and certainly when you talk about bus fees, a child's safety should never be trumped by a fee. I think that's a real tough nut to crack, and I will never go down that road. I think that, you know, kids getting to school safely is paramount.
Yeah, and I would add to that, you know, I certainly would not be in favor of any kind of bus fee if Chief Leonard wasn't intimately involved in the conversations and in negotiations around it, because, you know, to ask parents to be sending their kids out walking streets that don't have crossing guards it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I'd like to reiterate too, again, this came up last spring, and safety really has to be paramount here for the students in the schools. And that means drawing on both the police as well as the community to define what is a reasonable standard for these fees and how we can use the buses.
Well, just as a natural tie-in to buses, we also had the issue last year of buses with AMSA. And I'm wondering, as new school committee members, you probably watched a very hard fight by the previous committee from trying to get AMSA from starting operations in Marlboro. What are your thoughts on AMSA and charter schools?
I personally am very supportive of charter schools and have been since day one. And at the same time, I think it's a ludicrous notion to take money away from one to benefit the other. There's a real problem with the funding mechanism. The idea of competition in education and the idea of innovative thought, I think is wonderful. It's really creating an unlevel playing field, though, to do so by taking money away from the public schools. I am supportive of AMSA as they are. I don't think I have the level of hard feelings others do, and I don't think that we should continue, whether it be superficial or otherwise, to try to alienate them. They're going to be part of the community, and I think getting back to why we're here, it's to make sure that the kids get the best education possible. Something like 30 to 40 of those children there are our children. They're Marlboro kids. They're part of the community. Am I supportive of the financing they take from us? Absolutely not. And it's not their problem, though, per se. It's a problem with the legislature, and it's not to backhand anybody. This has been an ongoing issue about the funding mechanism for charter schools. It really creates an unlevel playing field, and frankly, there's a lack of fairness. Insofar as I think people taking out their anger and I guess just general unhappiness on AMSA, I think at times is misdirected.
Michelle, Mark, your thoughts on whoever would like to chime in?
I really would have to agree that the inequity in the funding equations is the big piece that needs to be looked at. Philosophically, I agree. Competition is good in the public school sector. On a little bit different note, I don't think I'd be making the grade if I failed to talk a little bit about what the Marlboro Public Schools can offer in terms of advanced science, and that will be on public display with the high school science fair on the 28th of February at the high school in the field house. I believe it'll run roughly from 8:30 to noon, and the public is certainly invited on the latter half of that. And come out and see what the Marlboro High School can deliver in science.
And Michelle, your thoughts on charters? Or at least as they relate to Marlboro.
Yeah, I'll be honest that I had a lot of problems with the way AMSA came into Marlboro, and I think a lot of the negativity and the mistrust that built up amongst people in Marlboro had a lot to do with the style with which the AMSA people came into our town, our city. But I agree with Rob that now that they're here, we need to coexist and we need to live with them. And I certainly would never begrudge families, the decisions that they make in terms of the way they want to educate their children. But to take money away from the public schools in order to do it, I do agree with Rob. I think it's wrong. And I know that they're at the the legislature is looking into ways to hopefully change the funding structure. The legislators on the education committee came around and were speaking to people in different communities, and that topic came up a lot. So it's pretty clear that it's an issue. I know that the current administration is very pro-charter, and we'll have to see what happens in the next election and who will be the next governor and what their views are on charter schools and the funding. So we'll see.
Okay, now you've had 2 whole meetings under your belts for the month of January when we're taping the show. Expectations, was your first 2 meetings like you thought they would go, different? How have they met your expectations in terms of what you thought you could do? Because I know when I started, I was very, I don't want to say disappointed, but I thought there'd be a lot more things we could do. And you seem to be very regulated by the agenda. That was my initial perception, kind of at this point in time in my term. I was wondering, what are your thoughts on what the expectation has been so far? Different?
Something that broke out at the workshop meeting, I'll get into this first, that pertains to the agenda is the public participation section. I think this is a good forum to bring this out. We on policy are going to try and give this a closer look over and give people an opportunity to be more able to come forward to the committee and bring things to our attention on a real-time basis at the meetings. As it stands now, the public participation stands at the top of the agenda. There are some practical reasons for that, but what happens is things further down the agenda perhaps don't get the immediate feedback that would be helpful to all of us seated up there. That's one of the things that I think that we walked away from the workshop with.
Michelle, Rob, any quick thoughts on your first two meetings?
I would,
The first
I'm
30
sorry,
days?
go ahead. I would say, I think just on a quick note, I think I was a little bit let down, and it's not, that's not a mean-spirited comment. I think you have very high expectations that once you're elected, you're ready to dig your feet in. But I think there's some of the process of getting oriented, and I think once the subcommittee meetings begin to start up, which will be very soon, I think that's where a lot of the nuts and bolts will happen.
Michelle?
Yeah, and I think that the school committee meetings just basically are business meetings, and that's where motions are made and, you know, rules are followed, and I agree. I think there's going to be a lot more work that's going to be happening in subcommittees.
Great. Now, just to wind down, we're almost at the end of our hour. I know that each of you have, I believe, email and for the viewers to contact you with any questions. Rob, how to reach you if people want to get a hold of you?
I'd just like to say before I give the information, and I know I'm taking up other time here, but I think it's really important. This is a collective arrangement. We're the elected officials, but we're not somehow bestowed with some great power beyond the fact that we're advocates for you. It's really important for folks at home to really help us inform the process, which is why we've asked to provide our email address and phone numbers. Again, really encourage you. Feel free to drop an email. Feel free to call. You know, we're both very, the three of us are quite open, as well as our colleagues are as well, to hearing from folks, because it does us a great service as well. My home phone number is 508-460-9407. And my email address is usseymour@msn.com. Thank you.
And Michelle?
Again, please call, email. We really need to keep the dialogue open between us and the public. My phone number is 508-481-5722, and my email is blam, BLAM, number 2, at comcast.net.
And Mark?
Yeah, I'd like to reiterate to what both my colleagues have said. These are representative positions, and our representation is only as good as the input you give us. And you can give me input at mhediger@comcast.com, and my phone number is 508-481-6293.
Well, thank you for watching, and if you have a question that you would like me to ask to the school committee members in future shows, please email your questions to me at eamartel15@aol.com. Again, thank you for watching Making the Grade. See you next month.